The Mahabharata. This is a tale of a tragic dynasty, a narrative of hatred, honor, courage, of virtue, love, ideals, and wickedness, and of a war so terrible it marked the threshold between one age and the next. We approach the story through a singer of ancient songs, a traveling poet who wandered the world free of encumbrances, worshipping at sacred bathing places, welcome at every court and hermitage where people loved spellbinding tales. He told it to a community of Brahmin seers at their ashram in the forest, engaged in a 12-year-long sacrifice. They were, no doubt, avid for entertainment of an improving kind. They gathered round him, clamorous with questions. "Distinguished bard," they said, "tell us where you have travelled from. What have you seen? What news have you brought us?" "Not long ago, I spent time at the court of the great King Janamejaya of the house of Bharata. You may know that the king is the direct descendant of the world-renowned Pandavas, great-grandson of Arjuna, the legendary archer. I happened to be present at the time when the king was holding a snake sacrifice to avenge his father, King Parikshit, who was poisoned by a snake and died a premature and painful death. Guests had come from the remotest corners of the land to witness the event. Among them was the ancient seer, Vyasa, noblest of men, greatest of all scholars, widely revered poet and ascetic, together with his most advanced disciples. King Janamejaya received Vyasa with lavish honors, and the seer was pleased. "Sir," said the king, "you witnessed at first hand all that happened to my ancestors, all their actions, all their vicissitudes. Please tell me everything as it occurred." Vyasa smiled. "That is a large request. I have composed the story of your lineage in a poem so long, so all-embracing, that it will take a whole lunar cycle and more to recite in its entirety." The poem was born, grew, and took its shape in the presence of my 5 disciples, and while they attended to my needs, they took it in and learnt my words by heart. Vyasa turned to his most able student, seated beside him. "Please, tell the king the story of his forebears, the epic poem of the Bharatas, as you have heard it from me, word for word." "Gladly," said the disciple. "I am honored to be the channel of Vyasa's thoughts. For anyone who speaks these marvelous lines and anyone who hears them is purified, cleansed even of their worst iniquity. What the poem contains concerning dharma, pursuit of wealth, pleasure, and final freedom may be found elsewhere, but you can be sure that what it does not contain is found nowhere." Although the poem tells of huge events, battles, armies of 1,000,000 men, though it speaks of gods and demons acting directly in the human world, the gist, the conflicts and dilemmas, the regrets, the way that good and bad, wisdom, delusion, strive for dominance in each of us, is still played out in every human heart and always will be. As you will soon see, the poem contains much more than an epic action. Long, long ago, unseen in the cosmos, gods and demons fought for supremacy. Demons, defeated, forced out by the gods, began to take birth in the human world as kshatriyas. They thought they should be gods. They despised lawful ways and moderation. The beautiful resources of the world were theirs to plunder, squander, smash, defile. Ravaging the earth, they multiplied, sowing hate, mistrust, and fear, oppressing and slaughtering gentler creatures, so that life became a misery. Earth went to Brahma, Lord of creation, and bowed down before him. "Oh, Lord Brahma, I am overwhelmed by so much wickedness. Then Brahma summoned all the gods and spoke. Earth is in danger. You must be born as humans, using a portion of yourself to endow a human being with godlike power. Employ your attributes as you see fit. Pitch your strength against the demonic forces which threaten to engulf the entire earth. The gods were eager to begin their mission, and they exhorted the Supreme Being, Vishnu himself, to take on human form. So it was that your splendid great-grandfather and his brothers, the 5 sons of Pandu, were partial incarnations of deities. And Krishna Vasudeva, their supporter in all things, was the knowing avatar of the great Lord Vishnu, the all-powerful. Their cousins, sons of Pandu's sightless brother, the 100 Kauravas, were of demon stock. But first, learn how the ancient seer, known as Vyasa, master of cosmic knowledge, composed this poem, the longest in the world, a poem compendium. It took shape silently in his mind, a panorama spreading out before him. He himself was both author and actor in his story, as we are in our own lives, and besides, all is permitted to the storyteller. The poem was a map of the labyrinth, the moral maze that is our life on earth. It told of choices and of mortal error, and how even the saintly go astray, while even the worst glimmers of gold reveal themselves to a compassionate eye. All should have access to the edifice that was his narrative, but he realized for his poem to last for ages hence, it must be written down. Picture him standing, bearded, rake thin, his eyes closed, his head and body smeared with ash and ochre, rags for covering, a visionary, the entire epic cradled in his head. He approached Brahma, Lord of creation, his inspiration all along, who happened to be paying him a visit. Vyasa spoke, Lord, I have composed a mighty poem, but who will write it down, so that people in the far future may read it and learn from it? Lord Brahma cast his mind over a number of candidates, all worthy scribes, and said, Ask Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, master of all things intellectual, god of beginnings. He it is who guards thresholds, the boundaries of time and space, who removes obstacles. Yes, ask Ganesha. He is best fitted for this gargantuan task. I'll do it, said Ganesha, but only if you speak your poem at my writing speed. I won't put up with hesitations, false starts, and other tedious practices too common to those who dictate. Agreed, replied Vyasa. But you, in turn, must undertake to write only those things you have fully understood. So, by inserting knotty passages, the seer would win himself some thinking time. Hardly pausing for breath, Vyasa spoke. Ganesha wrote with equal energy. When his pen failed, he broke off his tusk tip and scribbled on and on. In this way was written the story of a noble line divided against itself. Now, listen. Long before the ill-fated Bharatas fought the great war on the crack of ages, there lived the foundling daughter of a fisherman, whose name was Satyavati. It could be said that the whole tragic tale began with her ambitious foster father. Each day she rowed a boat across the Yamuna, ferrying travelers from bank to bank. One morning, a great sage on a tour of sacred bathing places boarded her boat. As they glided gently, her beautiful arms pulling easily, bare feet braced against the sturdy timbers, he desired her, though she smelt unpleasant. Not only did she live with fishermen, but she had been born from a fish's belly. The sage made his intention known. The girl was horrified. Oh, Blessed One, those rishis standing on the banks can see us. The sage summoned a mist to envelop them. But I am a virgin. How could I return home to my father's house if I lay with you? He reassured her virginity would remain intact. And furthermore, lovely smiling girl, you may choose a boon. I wish my body had a heavenly fragrance, replied Satyavati. And it was so. That same day, she gave birth to a son on an island in the river. Instantly, he became a grown man, dedicated to an ascetic life. Before departing, he told his mother she could summon him in time of need, merely by thinking of him. Remember me when things are to be done. This was the author of our epic poem, Vyasa, the Island Born. Hastinapura, on the river Ganga, is a well-ordered, large and prosperous city. It was a stronghold of the lineage of Bharata. Its ruler at the time was Shantanu, known for his hunting prowess. One day, riding near the river bank, stalking buffalo and antelope, he saw a woman. She was so beautiful. The king stood still, staring in amazement at her flawless skin, her lovely face. He did not know she was the river goddess Ganga in human form. Whoever you are, cried Shantanu, female demon, goddess or celestial nymph, consent to be my wife. Ganga said, I shall become your queen, Shantanu. I shall love you dearly, cherish you, do all I can to please you, but for your part, you must never question what I do or I shall leave you instantly. The king agreed. They enjoyed happy years together, and Ganga gave birth to 7 healthy sons. But one by one, she drowned them in the river, and each time Shantanu held his tongue. Finally, with the 8th, he could not bear it. I long for my own son. How can you do this, wicked, unnatural woman? Ganga laughed. I am Ganga, goddess of the river. 8 celestial beings who enjoyed all the delights of heaven had been cursed to be born mortal. Distraught, they begged me to become human so I could carry them in my womb. And they said, once we are born, throw us in the river to drown. In that way, we shall be released from the hardships of a mortal life. I replied, I will do as you ask on this condition. Allow one son to live, so my husband may have an heir. They agreed. My task is done. You shall have your son. He will return when he is grown. Ganga's gift to you. Now I must leave you. And with that, she plunged into the sparkling water and was gone. Though grief-stricken, Shantanu ruled in peace for many years, and his kingdom flourished. One afternoon, wandering by the river, he noticed the water level had fallen and saw a handsome boy shooting arrows with such speed and skill they formed a dam across the river. As the king stared, the boy vanished. Then Ganga rose up from the water, leading the boy archer by the hand. This is your son, she said. He is well versed in the Vedas, trained in the arts of war, and understands dharma as profoundly as the most learned sage. Now, take him home. For some time, Shantanu lived joyfully with his son, who was all sons to him, as dutiful as he was talented. His name was Devavrata, of godlike vows. The king often travelled far from home on hunting expeditions. One spring day, riding in the forest by the Yamuna, he noticed an intoxicating fragrance. Tracking it, he found a dark-eyed girl, divinely beautiful, a fisher maiden. Tell me who you are. What shall I call you? My name is Satyavati, she replied. The king, of course, knew nothing of her past. To him, She was the answer to his longing, and keen to marry her, he sought her father. The wily fisherman was thrilled, but cautious. "I know how these things work," said the old man. "You have a son. In the course of time, he will ascend the throne, and my poor daughter and her own children will be cast adrift, cut off from one, without one coin to call their own. I see it coming. I only consent if you make your firstborn son heir apparent." Shantanu was shocked. Out of the question for him to disinherit Devavrata. But back in Hastinapura, in his heart, he pined for Satyavati. Obsessively, through every sleepless night, he thought of her until his cheeks grew thin, his eyes lackluster. He was not himself. Devavrata was concerned and finally discovered why his father was so melancholy. "Father," he told him, "here is the solution. It is an easy matter. I resign my place as heir apparent. Satyavati's son shall be the next king. I will go and speak to her father." But it was not easy. Satyavati's father, shrewd old fellow, shook his head at Devavrata's plan. He had thought of yet another problem. "Strong-armed one, it's not that I don't trust you. I know that you would never break a promise. But how do I know your sons will feel the same? I still withhold consent. Then," said Devavrata, "here and now, in the name of all that I hold sacred, in the name of my guru, of my mother, and of Dharma, I vow to live a life of celibacy. I shall never marry." From this time onward, Prince Devavrata was known as Bhishma, meaning awesome one. The people were dismayed to think that Bhishma, whom they loved, would never be their ruler. But the king was so grateful to his son for the immense sacrifice he had made. He blessed him, saying, "My son, may your death only come at the moment of your choosing." 2 sons were born to the royal couple, and Bhishma cherished them like his own children. On the death of Shantanu, the eldest, was consecrated king. He was a warrior par excellence and defeated every foe, growing in confidence and self-regard until he fought the chief of the Gandharvas and lost his life. The second son was too young to handle affairs of state, and Bhishma acted for him as his regent. To secure the royal line, he came to hear that a neighboring king had 3 daughters, each one beautiful, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika, who were about to make their choice of husband. Summoning his chariot and his weapons, Bhishma set off at speed for where eligible Kshatriyas had gathered for the princess's joint Swayamvara. Striding into the forum, Bhishma spoke, his voice like thunder. "There are several ways by which a Kshatriya may claim a bride, but the one that commands greatest respect is to bear her off by force. This I shall do. I stand here ready to fight any man who cares to challenge me." And with that, he lifted all 3 girls into his chariot and raised his sword, which glittered in the sun. Clattering into the courtyard of the palace, Bhishma gave the beautiful princesses to Shantanu's firstborn as his brides. The 2 younger princesses were delighted, and he with them. Their dark, shining hair, voluptuous breasts and buttocks, perfect skin. But Amba had already made her choice. She had been about to bestow her garland on Shalva. When she told Bhishma this, he gave her leave to depart from the city and go to her lover. Later, you will hear the fatal consequence of that decision for Amba and for Bhishma. The pleasure-loving second son left the detailed conduct of the kingdom to Bhishma while he dallied with his wives. The seasons came and went. No heir was born. After 7 years, the king fell ill with consumption, and despite the efforts of the best doctors, he grew weak and sank like the setting sun in the realms to the realm of darkness. His sorrowing young widows were left childless. This was a catastrophe. With no one left who could provide the next generation, the thread of the Bharatas would be broken. Satyavati took to her bed in grief. Her 2 dear sons deceased, the lineage in deep crisis, and she longed for grandsons. Then she thought, in this extremity, perhaps Bhishma would set aside his vow. Mother, said Bhishma, it is impossible. I understand your anguish, but my vow is more important to me than life itself. Dharma for times of distress does not extend to breaking solemn promises. In the great sweep of time, everything passes. All we can do is stay faithful to the truth. But there is an alternative solution. A Brahmin can be asked. When Bhishma said this, Satyavati thought of Vyasa. Shyly, she told Bhishma the circumstances of Vyasa's birth. I can summon Vyasa now and ask him to father children on the royal widows. Satyavati bent her mind on Vyasa, and he appeared. He was tall and gaunt, with rusty matted hair, filthy, foul-smelling, smeared with earth and ash, a fearful sight. I will do it, he said, but their discipline must be to tolerate my smell and unkept looks without flinching. She prepared Ambika. In the dead of night, your brother-in-law will come into your room. Welcome him, so you can bear a son to save the Bharatas. At night, soft lamps were placed around the room, and incense burners wafted pleasant scents. Ambika thought it would be Bhishma who would come to her. Instead, she saw a dirty, bearded stranger whose piercing eyes appeared to blaze at her. The girl was so appalled and terrified she kept her eyes closed tightly. My wise son, asked Satyavati, will a prince be born? He will, replied Vyasa. He will be immensely strong, courageous, learned, wise. He will be the father of 100 sons. But because his mother would not look at me, he will be blind. Alas, said Satyavati, a blind man cannot be an effective king. In due course, as Vyasa had predicted, Dhritarashtra was born, completely blind. Satyavati made the same arrangements with Ambalika. But when Vyasa stood beside her bed, the girl took fright, her face drained of colour. So it was that her son was born unnaturally pale, though well endowed in every other way. He was named Pandu, Pale One. Satyavati asked Vyasa to give Ambika one more chance to bear a perfect son. But her courage failing her, Ambika put a maidservant in her bed instead. The girl welcomed Vyasa as a lover, and the seer greatly enjoyed his night with her. You will no longer be a servant, he said, and your son will be the wisest man on earth. So Vidura was born, an incarnation of Dharma, god of virtue, who had been cursed to be born from a Shudra womb. Vidura would become known for loyalty and wisdom, but because his mother was low-born, he would frequently be disregarded within the household. After this third birth, the seer vanished, for now no longer needed. So it happened that the great Vyasa secured the future of the lineage in general
rejoicing in the kingdom. It was as if the coming of the 3 Bharata princes conferred a benediction on the land. The kingdom prospered. Rains were plentiful, swelling the Ganga, spilling generously onto the lush green of the paddy fields. Plump ears of barley, rice, fruits, vegetables were piled high in the markets. Livestock thrived and the granaries were full to overflowing. Bhishma was like a father to the princes. He brought the court the best and wisest teachers to ensure that the boys would be well trained in Vedic law and all the skills and arts essential to a royal Kshatriya. They learned to fight with every kind of weapon. Pandu excelled with a bow, Dhritarashtra at heroic feats of strength, while Vidura's knowledge of dharma was unparalleled. Owing to his blindness, Dhritarashtra was thought unfit to rule without assistance. Many of the functions of a king were held by Bhishma, while the fearless Pandu took on the protection of the realm. His successful conquests swelled the coffers of the treasury, and Hastinapura teemed with travellers from many lands. He shared his personal booty with his brothers and decked their mothers with exquisite jewels. Dhritarashtra, as a senior brother, held splendid and elaborate sacrifices with fat remuneration for the priests. With the lineage always in mind, Bhishma arranged a marriage for the blind prince with Gandhari, daughter of a neighbouring king. On her wedding day, seeing her blind husband, she took a cloth and bound it around her eyes. This she wore from that time onwards, so she would not enjoy superiority over her husband. Bhishma thought hard about a match for Pandu. Not only must his bride be virtuous, but the marriage must be advantageous politically, securing all alliance with another powerful kingdom. He heard that Kunti, a lovely Yadava princess, as spirited as she was virtuous, and Madri, daughter of the Madra king, were of age to marry. Pandu travelled to Kunti's Swayamvara and was chosen by her from many thousands of contenders. Then Bhishma visited the Madra king and, at great expense, obtained Madri, celebrated for her beauty. Last, Bhishma found a bride for Vidura, the illegitimate daughter of a king, of mixed descent like him, with whom he found great happiness fathering many sons. Perfect! But all was not quite as it seemed, for Kunti had a secret. She had buried it, consigned it to a rarely visited corner of memory, and there she hoped it would stay. But acts have consequences. Karma, the eternal law, plays out ineluctably, and Kunti's secret contained the seed of tragedy and grief. Some time before her birth, Kunti's father had made a promise to a childless cousin. "You shall have the firstborn child to me to bring up as your own." That child was Kunti, and she grew up in her foster father's palace, loved and loving, modest and beautiful. It happened that one day, a famous Brahmin, known for his short temper and ready curses, came to visit. He was a tall, formidable, curt in his demands. Kunti's foster father, extremely anxious not to give offence, said to him, "Great Brahmin, my house is yours. My daughter, who is of excellent conduct, will satisfy your needs in every way. You only have to ask." So night and day, putting aside all wishes of her own, Kunti served the Brahmin. He tested her, making rude, unreasonable requests. But at all times, promptly and cheerfully, she waited on him, and the uncouth guest grew fond of her. When a full year was up, the Brahmin was preparing to move on. "Lovely one, you have served me perfectly. You may choose a boon and I shall grant it." "Sir, that you and my father are pleased with me is boon enough." Then, said the great Brahmin, I shall teach you a mantra. With these words, you can summon any god you like to give you a son. And having taught her, he disappeared to everyone's relief. Kunti was curious. Could the Brahmin's mantra really summon the celestials? At this time, she noticed her first period and felt ashamed she was now a woman and yet unmarried. One day, as the sun rose in its glory over the distant hills, the mantra came to mind. At once, Surya, the sun god in human form, blazed before her, the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. Immense, armored in gold, he said, Speak, charming girl. You summon me. What shall I do for you? Kunti cried out in horror, Go back, my lord, back from where you came. I was only playing. Surya frowned. You cannot call forth a god simply to dismiss him. I know your mind. You wish to lie with me, and to bear a son who will be unrivaled in his prowess. Come now, if you simply make me take my leave, and I do not give you the son your heart desires, I shall be ridiculed by all the gods, and I shall curse you, and your father too. Kunti sobbed. But I'm just a child, a virgin. The good name of my family will be ruined. Spare me. To lie with you would be a dreadful sin. Not at all, sweet and comely woman, said the sun god. How could I urge you to do something wrong when I have the welfare of the world at heart? Besides, after we've lain together, you will remain a virgin. And will my son have golden armor as you have? He will. And, in addition, he will be endowed with divine earrings to protect him from harm. Then, said Kunti, I will lie with you. She managed to conceal her state from all except her nurse. And when she came to term, Kunti gave birth to a boy, most beautiful, wearing cuirass of gold and earrings that lit up his face. She wept with joy, but with grief too, since she must give him up, play the part of the innocent, carefree girl she was before. She placed him in a casket, and at the dead of night, she and her nurse crept to the riverbank. Holding the casket, Kunti whispered a blessing to her son. May the world welcome you. May no creature harm you, neither those that walk on land nor those that lurk in water. May your shining father guide you. May you perform heroic deeds. May you be loved, my son. Then, in tears, she floated him adrift in his casket on the shining water, and he was borne up by the gentle current, carried on the black breast of the river, drifting onwards calmly, silently, as one river flowed into another, joining, at last, the broad, majestic Ganga. Eventually, the casket caught in reeds, and there its journey ended. At that time, a worthy chariot driver, Adhiratha, went with his wife, Radha, to the Ganga to pray and worship at the sacred river, as they always did when evening came. They were a devout and devoted couple, but they had no children, a great sorrow. On that evening, she saw the casket by the riverbank, and when Adhiratha brought his tools and levered off the lid, they were amazed. They saw a baby, glowing like the sun, with golden armor and bright, sparkling earrings that were joined to him. The man and wife were overcome with joy. A miracle, said Adhiratha. They took the baby home, and after this, Radha bore other children of her own. The boy grew strong, devoted to the truth. They named him Vasusena, armed with riches, later known as Karna. When he was older, his parents told him how he had come to them. They would often talk about that day and speculate about his origins. All through Karna's life, although his birth was unknown to him, he was attracted to the sun god as his special deity. Every morning, early as the sun ascended, breasting the hills, painted the world blood red, he stood alone, facing east, worshipping Surya. And in the evening, as the sun declined, he stood in contemplation, his palms joined in prayer and devotion. At such times, if Brahmins came to him begging for alms, he would always give them what they asked. This was his lifelong practice and his vow. When Pandu was not absent from campaigns, he often spent his time deep in the forest on hunting expeditions, for the chase was his great passion. One unlucky day, he saw a deer in the act of mating with a lovely doe. He aimed, he shot it. The deer was actually an ascetic who had assumed the likeness of a deer because he had renounced all human contact. With his failing breath, he shouted, "Even the vilest sinner would stop short of doing what you have done." "I don't blame you for hunting," said the sage, "but it was cruel to kill an innocent in the act of love. So, you will share my fate. Your life will end when you give way to passionate desire for a beloved woman." Then he died. Pandu was desolate. He must become a celibate, never to have children. The dear ascetic had revealed to him the error of his pleasure-seeking life. Better renounce the world, shave my head, wander the land homeless, without blessings, without possessions, eating what I beg. In that way I can expiate my guilt. Kunti and Madri cried, "We will come too." They travelled north. For many months they walked across bleak desert country, through the foothills of the Himalaya, into the high mountains. Compassionate, unselfish, disciplined, he won great merit, great respect, and yet he was still disturbed. A man's duty is to beget sons for his ancestors. When I die, I will die forever. There will be no one to remember me, and I shall never reach the heavenly realms. This thought came to distress him more and more. His wives were desperate to ease his sorrow. Then, quietly, Kunti revealed to Pandu the following. "When I was young, not much more than a child, a Brahmin taught me how to summon gods to do my bidding. I shall say no more, but now, if you agree, cherished husband, I will call on a god to give us a son." "Lovely woman," cried Pandu joyfully. "Summon Dharma, god of righteousness." Kunti did so, and through the power of yoga, Dharma took human form to lie with her. In due time, when she gave birth to a son, a disembodied voice was heard to say, "He shall be called Yudhishthira. He will be the Dharma king, defender of right action." After a year, another son was born, sturdy Bhima, child of the wind god Vayu, he who stirs up cyclones and tornadoes. Bhima was built like a block of iron. Once, he tumbled off his mother's lap when she was sitting on a mountain ledge. Down he hurtled, spinning, plummeting as Kunti screamed in horror. But the rocks were shattered as his body hit the ground while he laughed in delight. Pandu reflected, "Success on earth rests on both faith and effort. One cannot change the course of destiny, but heroic acts can achieve wonders. I wish for a son whose deeds will be supreme." He thought of Indra, chieftain among gods. he who hurls thunderbolts and lashing rain. I will obtain a powerful son from him. Then she summoned him, and the god favored her with a child. When Arjuna was born, a voice was heard, rumbling from the clouds. This child will bring joy to his mother. He will be a scourge to countless enemies. Bull among men, undefeated, he will save the Bharatas. Madri longed to have a son of her own. Too diffident herself, she asked Pandu to speak to Kunti for her. So it was that Kunti gave Madri one use of the boon. Madri fixed her minds upon the Ashwins, beautiful twin deities who drive away darkness, heralding the dawn. She gave birth to Nakula and Sahadeva, twins who would both be beautiful and brave. When Yudhishthira was born to Kunti, the joyful news soon reached Hastinapura. Gandhari wept. She herself was pregnant, had been pregnant for a year already. But as the seasons came and went, she waited and waited. Nothing. Some time before, Vyasa had arrived at court exhausted, famished, and Gandhari welcomed him and cared for him. Vyasa had been moved by her compassion, her piety, the fact that she had chosen blindness when she could have had the joy of seeing the glorious created world. He blessed her, saying, "You will be the mother of 100 strong, courageous sons." Did the wise and far-seeing Vyasa, even as he granted her this boon, know the sorrow that would come of it? As though he had just cursed her, not wished her joy. Perhaps. Gandhari nursed her swollen belly. As the months dragged on, it was hard and lifeless. Despairing, she decided she must act. Grimacing with pain to rid herself of the intolerable load she carried, she struck her belly, pushed, strained, cried aloud, and gave birth to a monstrous mass of flesh, like a dense and glistening clot of blood. Horrified, she made to throw the thing into the fire, but found Vyasa standing in the room. "Is this the 100 sons you promised me?" she asked him bitterly. "I never lie, not even as a joke," said Vyasa. "Still less when I am serious. Have 100 jars filled up with ghee. Now, sprinkle the flesh with water." Instantly, the hideous ball split into 100 pieces, embryos the size of a finger joint, and one extra. Vyasa took each one, placed it in a jar, and left instructions about tending of the embryos, and when the vessel should be broken open. "I would like to have a daughter too," thought Gandhari. Vyasa read her mind. Then he departed for the Himalayas to perform austerities and prayer. More months of waiting. In the room of jars, a dozen nurses tended the embryos that slowly grew inside the glowing vessels. One day, Gandhari woke to a loud commotion. The first baby had been born from his jar, and he was brought to her. Her hands encountered a large, muscular infant, her firstborn son. But those who cared for him became uneasy. They shuddered as the infant raised his voice, dismal, ugly, like a braying ass. This infant, who was born on the same day as Kunti's Bhima, was named Duryodhana. Dhritarashtra summoned many Brahmins as well as Vidura and Bhishma. "I know that Yudhishthira, as the eldest prince, will inherit the kingdom, but will my son, my Duryodhana, come after him? Give me your best advice." At once, a horrible cacophony was heard. Howling wolves, hyenas, insane cackle, harsh croaks as crows and other carrion eaters flapped overhead. The city streets swarmed with creatures never before seen, familiars of the strange royal brood born in darkness, born to remain always invisible to their blind father, their blindfolded mother. Vidura knew what the portents meant. Oh, brother, this birth portends the ruin of your line. Your firstborn son is destined to destroy all that we've held sacred through the ages. Dhritarashtra wept and wrung his arms. What can I do to guard against disaster? Only something that you will not do. Kill him. Content yourself with 99. Without this eldest, all your other sons will be harmless, ordinary boys. But this creature comes from an evil place to spread pain and destruction everywhere. Exterminate him so that the rest may flourish. Give him up for the sake of all of us. But Vidura was right. Though Dhritarashtra did not doubt what his brother spoke, he could not bring himself to kill the child, his longed-for firstborn, Duryodhana. Over the next month, the other jars yielded 99 more infant boys and one daughter, who was named Dushala. The 100 sturdy sons of Dhritarashtra would come to be known as the Kauravas. At this time, another son was born to Dhritarashtra by a low-born woman, sent to serve him while Gandhari was indisposed. His name was Yuyutsu, and he would become a royal friend to the 5 sons of Pandu. In their forest home among the mountains, the Pandavas were happy, running free, climbing, inventing games, learning the skills a Kshatriya boy should know, protected, cherished by Pandu and their 2 devoted mothers. But their father never saw them grow to manhood. One spring day, when lovely blossom and soft unfurling leaves infused his mind, Pandu was consumed by love and passionate desire for Madri. Despite her screams, her terrified reminders, destiny deprived him of all sense. He entered her and died in the act of love. Thus was the curse fulfilled. Kunti bitterly blamed Madri, and despite her protestations, the weeping Madri felt responsible. As the senior wife, Kunti proposed to follow Pandu, but Madri held her back. Our beloved husband died because of me, cheated of fulfillment as I was. I will follow him to Yama's realm. Kunti, be a mother to my children, as I know I could never be to yours. With that, she climbed onto the funeral pyre and, covering Pandu's body with her own, abandoned herself willingly to the flames. The last rites for Pandu were performed by the seers among whom he had lived and who were now entrusted with the care of his wife and sons. They thought it right to take the family to Hastinapura, where Bhishma would look after them. The Pandavas were awed by Hastinapura. The main gateway, topped by massive towers, was tall enough for elephants to enter. Not far away stood impressive buildings whose several stories housed the offices of the foremost state officials, their gables ornamented with imposing statues. Just inside the gate, a tall stone column, its capital ornately carved, proclaimed the king's authority and the protection that his rule extended to his people like a strong father's benevolent arm. This was the noble city of the elephant. Here, the Pandavas' successors to their father were received with every show of joy. They stared around, bewildered as bumpkins. Their mother, of course, remembered elegance and luxury, but to her 5 sons, the spaciousness of this new life Soft beds, exquisite food. Eating was Bhima's favorite occupation. Servants on every hand. It was wonderful. Pandu's sons were home where they belonged, to take their place beside their 100 cousins. But Vyasa spoke to Satyavati. With Pandu's passing, the times of happiness are over. There is trouble in the offing. Earth herself is growing old and sick. If you would avoid a painful sight, the Bharata clan tearing itself apart, you should leave now. Satyavati listened. She sought out Ambika and Ambalika, and together, the three aging women entered the last phase of their earthly life. After retreating to a forest ashram, they passed their days in great austerity before embarking on their final journey.
At first, the two families of cousins played well together, being close in age, keen on the same games and daring stunts. But it is never long before young boys try to outdo each other, prove who is best. So it was with these. The Pandavas excelled in every childish game and contest, but Duryodhana was used to being eldest, biggest, strongest, so was shocked when he challenged Bhima to a fight to find that he was so completely trounced that he ached for days. Humiliation. This was just the first of many reasons that Duryodhana grew to hate Bhima. Bhima, in fact, gained everyone's affection, except the Kauravas, by his energy and his engaging, frank enthusiasm. His booming voice, his bouncing, boisterous step and freely given smiles made all who saw him smile in return. But the Kauravas saw him in another way entirely. Month by month, year by bitter year, in Duryodhana, corrosive hatred grew like a hidden reservoir of gall. Most of all, he felt the Pandavas stood between him and life's advantages, power in particular. Yudhishthira looked very likely as the eldest prince to be the next king. Yet for all the time that Pandu and his sons were in the forest, Dhritarashtra reigned, and Duryodhana had thought he would, in time, be king himself. He was prepared to fight, if necessary, when the time came. But he saw that Bhima would bar his way. Bhima, the undefeated. Bhima, massive, stout as a mighty tree. Bhima, brave as a fighting elephant. Bhima, so devoted to his brothers. Bhima, Bhima, with a passionate longing. He wanted Bhima dead. But how? How? At the court, Duryodhana had an ally, Shakuni, Gandhari's older brother. His mild demeanour, soft voice, silky manner concealed a mind as a serpent's tongue, quick and as poisonous. To Duryodhana, this was a kindred soul. And while his parents made light of his complaints against his cousin, Shakuni listened, sympathised, caressed his nephew's seething head, and put in words the thought the unhappy prince had never dared voice to anyone. Bhima must die. For Duryodhana, this was the moment when idea, fantasy, to kill a kinsman, kill him under the very roof they shared, changed from mere dream to possibility. Thought became language. That was the alchemy that led in turn to deeds. And once such words were spoken, fluent on his uncle's lips, next came strategy, and after that, action. Action, the tipping point, the turn that step by step and inescapably set him on the road to Kurukshetra. Many were the actions taken on the road to the killing field of Kurukshetra. When Karna stood tall against Arjuna at the prince's coming out ceremony and was peremptorily made ennobled by Duryodhana. When the Pandavas escaped from the flammable lacquer house Duryodhana had conspired to build. When the 5 brothers acquired a shared bride, Draupadi. And following the division of the kingdom, when the Pandavas created the prosperous and powerful city of Indraprastha with its extraordinary hall of illusions, and Yudhishthira was consecrated king of kings. Pale and haggard, Duryodhana groaned. "Oh, uncle, I keep seeing that great hall, my cousin's treasury, bursting with wealth. and all 5 brothers rich in the attentions of radiantly lovely Draupadi, more beautiful than any other woman. I burn with jealousy. I'm like a river scorched dry by summer sun. Come now, said Shakuni. The sons of Kunti deserve prosperity. The wealth their father left to them has been increased through their own energy and skill, and they enjoy good fortune. Think of the times you tried to finish them in the lacquer house, yet they survived. The gods are on their side. Jealousy is useless. Accept things as they are. Impossible, cried Duryodhana. What man worth the name who sees his enemies enjoy such splendour, holding imperial sway over half the world? What man, knowing that such huge success is beyond his reach, would not despair? Uncle, he whispered, until they're crushed, I have only death in life. The whole world has flocked to honour them. I am alone, with no one to support me. Nephew, I understand, said Shakuni. There is a way for you to have revenge. Let Dhritarashtra invite Yudhishthira to the traditional game of dice. I'll play on your behalf. No worse gambler exists than Yudhishthira. He's far too honest, transparent as a child, yet he loves to play. I, on the other hand, have never lost a game. My skill at dice is widely known. I promise I will win his wealth from him. A widening chink of hope lit up in the dark heart of Duryodhana. He saw the possibility of stripping the Pandavas of everything they owned, grinding their faces in the dirt. But first, his father must be talked to and persuaded. The invitation must come from the king. When Dhritarashtra learned of the proposal from Shakuni, he was, as usual, doubtful, but also racked with sorrow for his son, whose voice he could hear cracking with distress, whose trembling and emaciated body he felt under his hands when he embraced him. He hesitated. Shakuni spoke up. Illustrious king, I urge you to accept this plan of mine. It is a way to take wealth from the Pandavas without the loss of blood on either side. One skilled at dice is able to win battles by other means. The dice will be my arrows, the marks on them my bow, and the dice cloth, the chariot carrying me to victory. Father, listen, said Duryodhana. You and I are like 2 boats, fastened one to the other. My interest should be yours. Or do you really not want me to flourish? Discontent and jealousy are good for Kshatriya. Contentment weakens the ambition striving which can bring success. So does fear, and so does limp compassion. In pursuit of prosperity, any means at all are justified. An enemy is one whose interests, like the Pandavas, run counter to one's own. Peaceful coexistence with an enemy is the way of fools and cowards. As things are, I do not know if I am strong enough to defeat the Pandavas. I have to know. Finally, the blind king was worn down by Duryodhana's vehemence and threats. As a sand dune, soft and shifting in its nature, is eroded by the waves that break on it. Besides, he loved his son. Without consulting his ministers, as he was prone to do, he called for Vidura and ordered him to carry an invitation with all speed to Indraprastha. Arriving at his nephew's court, Vidura was received with joy and every honour. Heart sinking and with a grim expression, he conveyed Dhritarashtra's invitation. Come, my dearest nephews, honour Hastinapura with a visit. A splendid gaming hall has been built where you will be well entertained with dice. Yudhishthira said, I understand. A trap is waiting for me, and yet it is my duty to fall in with the wishes of my uncle. If I'm not directly challenged, I'll not play. If I am, then I am honour-bound, and bound by my own vow not to refuse a challenge. Welcome to all present. Let play commence, cried Duryodhana with false bonhomie. Shakuni will play on my behalf. I put my entire wealth at his disposal. Gambling by proxy, said Yudhishthira, seems contrary to honourable practice. However, if you insist, I shall accept. Dicing involves deceit. Shakuni, I exhort you not to win by trickery. In any sport involving competition, the effort to defeat one's adversary could be called ignoble, though it never is, said Shakuni. In playing dice, the stronger player tries to defeat the weaker. That is the game. If you are afraid, refuse the challenge. I have vowed never to refuse a challenge. Let the game begin. We are all in the hands of destiny. Yudhishthira was the first to name his stake. This pearl necklace, richly worked with gold, matched by Shakuni. He cast his dice. Shakuni cast, his supple hands flashing like lightning. He smiled slightly.
I have won.
Yudhishthira protested. You confused me with a trick. But very well, Shakuni, let us continue. My store of gold, 100 finely fashioned silver jars, each containing 1,000 gold pieces. He threw his dice. So did clever Shakuni.
I have won.
Yudhishthira grew angry. My beautiful and swift royal chariot, the one that brought us here, it stands outside, hung with bells, furnished with tiger skins, drawn by 8 noble purebred horses, white as moonbeams. All this is my stake. Again he threw, closing his eyes until he heard Shakuni's voice.
Look, I have won.
It was as if the world shrank to a script Yudhishthira must follow. He could not see how Shakuni was managing to win. He could not track the other's sinuous moves. He was consumed by furious desire, a rage to triumph over his tormentor and recoup his losses. Nothing else mattered. I have 1,000 rutting elephants, well-trained, powerful, huge as monsoon clouds, fit for a king. Each one a fearless fighter with terrible tusks, caparisoned in gold.
Look, I have won.
Shakuni's silken voice was steady, not a trace of exultation. Dhritarashtra, though, was feverish, agog to know each new development, asking repeatedly, has my son won? The heat was rising in the assembly hall. Yudhishthira's 4 brothers had turned ashen. Duryodhana was shaking with excitement. Vidura approached the king quietly. "O wise king, I beg you, reconsider what you have set in train. Do you remember when Duryodhana was born, he cried aloud like a jackal. An ill-omened howling that echoed through the palace echoes still." Duryodhana, overhearing, sneered at Vidura. You've always been partial to the Pandavas, and yet you stay around here like a cat, scratching spitefully at those who feed it. You should get lost, old man. We do not need your gloomy notions. Meanwhile, Yudhishthira had staked and lost the vast contents of his treasury. His palaces, lands, his great assembly hall, the heaven-inspired city of Indraprasthra, his entire kingdom. Each time he threw, although he well knew the odds were against him, he hoped against reason for a miracle. Glassy-eyed, he sat in a slumped silence. "Have you nothing more?" murmured Shakuni. "Surely your luck will turn. You could win back everything you've lost." The Pandavas, silenced by respect for protocol, willed Yudhishthira to walk away. But in a voice not like his own at all, as if half drunk or mesmerized, he said, "My brother Nakula, who is wealth to me, I stake him now." A disbelieving gasp ran through the hall. Shakuni, impassive, threw his dice. "Look, I have won Nakula. My brother Sahadeva, wise and just, learned in the matters of this world. Even though the last thing he deserves is to be staked like this, I stake him now. Look, I have won your brother Sahadeva. It seems these youngest 2 are dispensable, unlike your brothers Arjuna and Bhima." "Wretch!" cried Yudhishthira, face drained of blood. "Never try to put a knife blade between us. The 5 of us are of one heart and soul. He that is the world's greatest warrior, virtuous over every enemy, the prince who is the hero of the world, my brother Arjuna. I stake him now." "Look, I have won him too," Shakuni smiled. "Why not stake the last wealth you have left?" "The strongest mace bearer that ever lived, my great-souled prince, massive as a bull, fearless in war, kindest of sons and brothers, who would spend his last ounce of strength for us. How little he deserves this. I stake Bhima. Look, I have won." The horrified spectators might have thought that now that the 4 brothers were passing into slavery, the dice game was over. They were wrong. "Oh, Pandava and Shakuni, have you nothing left to stake?" "Only I myself," said Yudhishthira. "I'm still unwon, still free to leave this hall and travel where I will. I hereby stake myself." "Look, I have won," smiled Shakuni. "But in staking your own self while you still had property, you have done wrong. There still remains an asset dear to you, your wife, Draupadi, the dark princess of Panchala, she of outstanding beauty. By staking her, you could win back yourself." "She who is perfect," whispered Yudhishthira. "Draupadi, yes, I stake her." At once there was agitation in the hall. Some people fainted. Only Duryodhana and his friends laughed aloud, and Dhritarashtra, excited, asked repeatedly, "She won?" "Look," cried Shakuni, "I have won her. I have won the Panchala princess." Duryodhana turned to a low-born page. "You go and fetch her to serve the household of the Kauravas." Trembling and with reluctant steps, the messenger approached Draupadi's door. "Go back and ask my husband if he gambled me before he lost the game or afterward. Then come and tell me." The messenger obeyed, but could get no answer from Yudhishthira, almost demented with despair and guilt. "Let her be brought to the assembly hall," said Duryodhana. "She can ask her question for herself." And again he sent the page to Draupadi. "I will not come," she said, "but say that I am willing to respect what the venerable men in the assembly may definitely tell me." Seeing the page quaking with dread, this time Duryodhana sent Dushasana, his closest brother, bloodthirsty and coarse, to fetch Draupadi. "Come, my fine girl, you've been lost at dice and are nothing but a slave. We own you now. You'll have to learn to love the Kauravas and show us how you've made our cousins happy. I'm here to fetch you. You've no choice. Be quick." She tried to run, hoping to find protection in the women's quarters. Dushasana followed, grabbed her, pushed her, dragging her by the hair toward the assembly hall. She whispered that it was her time of the month when she should not be seen, when she was wearing a single garment. But he laughed lewdly. "Let everybody see you have your period. Wear what you like, or come to us stark naked. Slave, you can't be so particular. Call on the gods until your voice is hoarse. They won't rescue you." Soon she was flung in front of the assembly, her long hair loose, her garment torn, dishevelled, and stained with blood. Every decent man lowered his eyes in shame, but none of them, not the elders and not her 5 husbands, uttered a word of protest. They were silenced, for to speak out would have been disrespectful to Dhritarashtra, and some of those present feared falling out with Duryodhana. Draupadi stood upright in their midst, glowing with anger. She glanced scornfully at her husband, and that one glance hurt them more than the loss of everything they owned. She addressed Dushasana. "It is an outrage for you to drag me here, a virtuous woman, to a hall of men. I see before me many elders well versed in propriety and in dharma, yet not one of them raises his voice at this disgraceful insult. Do they lack courage? Or do they condone your vile behaviour? A curse on you! My husbands will not pardon this offence." "Slave, slave," jeered Dushasana, rubbing his hands. Karna laughed, thinking of how Draupadi had scorned him at her bridal tournament, and Shakuni and Duryodhana cheered. But everybody else was choked with shame and sorrow and stayed dumb. Draupadi spoke. "My noble husband is the son of Dharma and follows Dharma. Let no word of mine be heard as blaming him in any way. I wish to hear an answer to my question." Bhishma said, "Dharma is a subtle matter. The answer to your question is not obvious. One without property has nothing to stake, but on the other hand, it is accepted that wives are the chattels of their husbands. As I understand it, when he put me up as his last stake, he had already gambled himself away into slavery. Is that not so?" Draupadi again looked to Bhishma, master of every nuance of the law, for a clear reply. No answer came. Seeing Draupadi weeping piteously, Bhima, unable to contain himself, leapt to his feet, his eyes blood red with rage, and shouted widely at Yudhishthira. I never heard of a gambler who staked even the life of a common prostitute, let alone that of his wife. Oh, shame on you! He made as if he would attack his brother, but Arjuna restrained him. Bhima, never have you uttered such an insult to our brother. In playing against his will when invited by a respected elder, he acted as a Kshatriya should act. You, though, by this rash outburst, are falling away from the highest dharma. You're matching our enemies' dishonour and wickedness. Then Vikarna, one of the younger sons of Dhritarashtra, addressed the assembled elders, urging those present to express a view. There was silence. So he spoke himself. It's deeply shameful for her to be dragged here. Yudhishthira was under the influence of an addiction. Furthermore, it was not his own idea, but Shakuni's to stake his wife. This despite the fact that Yudhishthira is not her sole husband. In any case, it's clear that the Pandava could not lose his wife if he had lost himself, since slaves can have no right to property. Draupadi is no slave, it stands to reason. There were sounds of approbation in the hall. Karna answered him contemptuously. You notice none of the elders speak for her. Only you green, impulsive youth, are swayed by sentiment. The fact remains. We clearly heard Yudhishthira stake all his possessions. That includes Draupadi. As for her being brought into this hall scantily dressed, if that's what's upsetting you, that is not an act of impropriety. Even to strip her naked would be no sin, since she has joined herself to 5 husbands, flouting every law of decency, and therefore is undoubtedly a whore, in the eyes of gods and men. Dushasana, make the Pandavas take off their clothes and strip this woman. At this, the Pandavas removed their upper garments and flung them down. Dushasana then grabbed at the loose end of Draupadi's robe and began to pull.
Draupadi closed her eyes in silent concentration. Dushasana brayed with triumphant laughter as he twirled her round, unravelling yard upon yard of cloth which pulled and pulled on the marble floor. More and more of it. His gleeful smile began to fade as minutes passed, and more minutes, and the garment covered her as securely as before, though a stream of silk, a multicoloured river, shimmered and snaked around the assembly hall. Everyone cried out in utter wonder and glowered at the sons of Dhritarashtra. Dushasana gave up, tired and angry. Bull like Bhima roared, his voice like thunder. As the gods are my witness, I vow that, before I enter the halls of death, I will tear open this man's wicked breast and drink his blood, as a lion savages a helpless deer, its eyes pleading in vain. If I do not, then let me never reach the pure and blessed realm of my ancestors. All who heard him shivered. The tide of feeling was now increasingly behind the Pandavas and against the wicked-willed Dhritarashtra, who was sitting mute, stroking his chin. Take this slave girl away, ordered Karna. But as Dushasana was dragging her, Draupadi cried, Stop! I have a duty which I neglected to perform before, through no fault of mine, to greet the elders in this assembly in the proper fashion. My lords, I do not deserve this treatment, to be forced to stand before this court in shame by you, members of the honoured family that is now mine. Since my Swayamvara, I have never been paraded in this way for men to scrutinise. Lords of the earth, where is honour in this hall? Where is dharma? Time must be out of joint when such outrages can be enacted unprovoked, unchallenged. I am the wife of great Yudhishthira, equal to him in rank. I am the daughter of King Drupada and the friend of Krishna. I ask again for an answer to my question. Am I one or not Am I a lowly slave, or am I a queen in a distinguished line? You surely know the law. I will accept whatever you decide. Bhishma answered, what has been done today will bring disaster on the Bharatas. Duryodhana spoke. This doom-mongering is so much old man's talk. Stick to the point. Draupadi, the answer to your question lies in your husbands, the 4 younger ones. If they disown Yudhishthira and declare that he is not your lord, then you go free. Duryodhana's cronies applauded him, while others shed tears at the Pandavas. Dark-skinned Draupadi, said Karna, notice no one here is speaking up to say you have not been won. In fact, Yudhishthira had lost you when he lost himself. Accept it. Accept it. You are a slave's wife, or rather, former wife, since slaves own nothing. Go now to the quarters of the king's relatives. The Kauravas, and not Kunti's sons, are your masters now. Choose another husband, one who will not gamble you away. Or shall we share you? In slaves, a willing, sensual disposition is always welcome. Show us what you can do. Duryodhana laughed and bared his hairy thigh obscenely to the weeping Draupadi. At this, Bhima's eyes blazed scarlet. I swear the day will come when I will break that thigh in a great battle, and you will plummet then into the deepest, darkest pit of death. Duryodhana turned again to the Pandavas. Come, reply, I'll abide by your decision. Arjuna said, our brother was our master when he staked us, but when Yudhishthira had lost himself, then whose master was he? No one's master, not even Draupadi's. It follows then he had no right to stake her. He turned to the assembly. Now acknowledge that the blameless Draupadi retains her freedom and her status as before. Many agreed with Arjuna's solution. Just then, a jackal began to howl loudly somewhere in the palace. Asses squealed and frightful birds croaked. King Dhritarashtra found the courage to address his son. Duryodhana, you have gone too far. This blameless princess of the Panchalas has endured the most grievous insults. Virtuous Draupadi, ask me for a boon, and you shall have it. My lord, said Draupadi, free the dutiful Yudhishthira from servitude, so that his son and mine can never be taunted with the name of slave. Let it be so, conceded Dhritarashtra. And now let me grant you a second boon. Then, my lord, let my other husbands go, together with their weapons and chariots. It shall be as you say, said Dhritarashtra. Now ask again. My lord, said Draupadi, greed is a threat to virtue. These 2 boons are enough for me. My noble husbands will make their own way through their own good acts. This is remarkable, said haughty Karna. In Draupadi, the Pandavas have a boat ferrying them across to their salvation. Bhima now leapt to his feet, on fire to unleash on the Kauravas the fury he had suppressed before. But Yudhishthira forbade it, and approaching Dhritarashtra, affirmed his loyalty. Go now in peace, said the king, and bear no grudge against us. Look with indulgence on your old blind uncle. All you lost, I hereby return to you. With that, the Pandavas, sombre and relieved, mounted their splendid chariots and left, setting out on the road to Indraprastha. You can imagine Duryodhana's rage when he heard the king dismantling everything he and Shakuni had achieved. He and his uncle formed a simple plan. He held his peace until the dust had settled in the wake of the departing chariot wheels, then went to Dhritarashtra. Do you think that by restoring all their wealth and assets to my cousins, all can be as before? How wrong you are. The Pandavas will never forget how Draupadi was insulted. As we speak, the angry sons of Pandu, before they have even reached Indraprastha, are planning their revenge. Arjuna flexing his bow, Gandiva, Bhima whirling his mace, the others urging on their horses, eager to gather an invincible fighting force, summoning their allies from far and near to march on Hastinapura. Remember, a wise ruler deals with his enemies before they grow in strength. Listen, Father, our hopes lies in the saintly Yudhishthira. If you summon him to play another game of dice, his honor won't allow him to refuse. He's bound to lose again. This time round, we will propose new terms. Just one throw. And let the stake be this, that whoever loses will relinquish his kingdom to the other. For 12 years, that loser will be exiled in the forest. The 13th year must be spent in public, incognito. If he is recognized, then another 13 years of exile must begin. But if he succeeds in hiding his identity, then his former kingdom will be returned to him. Those will be the terms of the wager. But in fact, by then, we will have used his absence to assemble a huge and loyal army and to garner powerful allies. So, if it comes to war, we will easily defeat the Pandavas. Ignoring the advice of wise counselors, the king, fearing the vengeance of his nephews, prepared to send after Yudhishthira with this renewed summons. Queen Gandhari came and pleaded with him. She loved her son, but she feared the portents and knew disaster dwelt in the person of Duryodhana. I understand, my lord, why at his birth you could not bring yourself to kill your son, a helpless infant, despite the prophecy that worthy Vidura's advice. But now you must oppose him. Surely it is fathers who should dictate to sons, not the reverse. The great-hearted Pandavas agree to peace. You must lead Duryodhana by example before he brings down ruin on us all. If fate decrees the ruin of our race, said Dhritarashtra, I cannot oppose it. Let the Pandavas return. Let our son gamble once more with Yudhishthira. A messenger pursued the Pandavas and caught up with them on the road to home. They were shocked and angry, but Yudhishthira felt unable to refuse the summons. What happens to us, good and bad, depends on what's ordained. Whether I accept or refuse, in the end, it makes no difference. Sorrowful, head bowed, Yudhishthira seated himself before the gaming table, flanked by his 4 brothers, oppressed by fate. In the tense silence before play began, his eyes happened to fall on Karna's feet. They struck him as familiar. Then he forgot. Opposite, Shakuni smiled unctuously. He explained the new terms of the game, what was at stake. Yudhishthira's face was blank. He threw. Shakuni threw. And, look, he said. Look, I have won. At once, the Pandavas prepared for exile, shedding their princely clothes, wrapping themselves in crudely cured deerskins. Draupadi, still wearing her blood-stained robe, Dushasana could not contain his glee and danced around the brothers, taunting them. These sons of Pandus are no men, they're eunuchs. At this time, they have been puffed up with pride, contemptuous of the sons of Dhritarashtra. But now they are brought crashing to the earth. Choose a different husband, Draupadi. The Pandavas are nothing now, mere husks without substance. As they left the hall, Duryodhana did a grotesque imitation of Bhima's leonine walk. You stupid fool, said Bhima. Your idiotic antics will come back to haunt you when I tear you limb from limb and break that thigh of yours, and when I rip open Dushasana's chest and drink his blood. Be sure, said Arjuna, that Bhima's words are true. He turned to Karna. More certain than the sun's brightness, more certain than the moon's coldness is this vow of mine, that 13 years from now I will dispatch you, son of Radha, to the realm of death if on that day our kingdom is not returned. Yudhishthira said farewell to Bhishma, who blessed him. Son, by your worthy actions you have surpassed even your ancestors. Go well. I shall look to your return. Vidura proposed to Yudhishthira that Kunti, being frail with age, should stay in Hastinapura with him and not face the rigours of the forest. Pale, sobbing, Kunti said goodbye to her mighty sons. Taking Draupadi aside, she said, My dear one, I know you are strong and brave. You will come through this. Please keep special watch on Sahadeva, my youngest, favourite son. Help him to guard against despondency. Oh, why has this disaster befallen you? If I had known my family would wander the pathless forest, having lost everything, I never would have brought my growing sons to Hastinapura after Pandu's death. Draupadi said, As I am stained in blood, so 13 years from now, Kaurava women will be smeared with the blood of their slaughtered sons and offer up oblations for their dead. Shortly after, the unfortunate exiles, no longer visible to straining eyes, had disappeared among the forest trees. The sky became green and grew strangely dark, as if the forces of the night were coveting the brilliance of the day. There were other portents and premonitions, dreams and appearances, so that dread, rather than joy, soon pervaded Dhritarashtra's court. Ah, said Dhritarashtra, I can only think of the future and its terrible punishment. My lord, that is your doing, said his attendant Sanjaya. You would not listen to the words of wisdom offered by Vidura, nor to the portents. Through his wickedness, your foolish son will be the death of all the Kauravas. It is the work of fate, sighed Dhritarashtra. I always try to make the best decisions, but when the gods intend someone's defeat, they first make him mad, so that the wrong course seems to be the right one. The power of fate can be simply this twisted view of things. All else follows. The Pandavas will never forgive the way Draupadi was insulted. Knowing their strength and aware that Krishna is their ally. I have never wanted conflict with them. Yet my foolishness, my great love for my son will bring about the all-consuming tragedy of war. At night, he paced his chambers. If he slept, he dreamed his splendid city was overrun by angry citizens baying for his life. He woke, gasping. He sent for sagacious Vidura, hoping for words of consolation. But Vidura offered no comfort. He condemned outright the dire proceedings in the gaming hall. There's only one way to avoid disaster. Forsake misguided Duryodhana. Restore your nephews to their rightful kingdom and banish that troublemaker, Shakuni. Dhritarashtra turned cantankerous. You always take the side of the Pandu sons. But Duryodhana is flesh of my flesh. How can I abandon my own body to favour others, even if it's at fault? It's simply impossible. And as for you, go and join your precious Pandavas. The forest is where you properly belong. Vidura, glad to leave the gloom and sorrow of the court, took his chariot and, tracking the Pandavas by asking strangers, crossing the Yamuna and then the Saraswati, reached their camp in the forest, where many devout hermits had made their home. On seeing him approach, Yudhishthira wondered if he was bringing a new challenge, a bid by Shakuni to win their weapons. But he was soon reassured. The Pandavas welcomed their uncle, eager for his news. He told them how things were at Hastinapura and what the king had said. Vidura passed delightful days in the pleasant clearing beside the Saraswati. But secretly, his mind often flew to Hastinapura, to the brother he had loved and served since they were boys. He knew Dhritarashtra must be yearning for his company, and he himself longed to give him comfort. So he was glad when Dhritarashtra's aide Sanjaya arrived with a message for him. The king regrets his words and is most anxious for your return. You are his eyes and heart in a dark world. Without you, he is lost. Duryodhana was furious when he saw his blind father closeted once more with Vidura, afraid that, yet again, his father would backtrack and vacillate out of sentimental love for his nephews, and out of fear. Although the Pandavas had accepted banishment with bowed heads, as long as they still walked the earth somewhere, Duryodhana could have no peace of mind. Suppose Vidura should persuade my father to reinstate them. If I see them return, I shall take poison, hang myself or something. I cannot bear to see them prosperous. Of course they won't come back, said Shakuni. You're getting agitated for no reason. They lost the bet. Surely you can't imagine Yudhishthira reneging on the terms. Your fears are childishness. Dukshasana and Karna took the same view, but the prince remained despondent. Listen to me, said Karna. It seems nothing but action will convince you. Let us go at once to kill the Pandavas in the forest while they are undefended. The other three were pleased with this idea. They armed themselves and made preparations to start the journey. But great-minded Vyasa, seeing the plotters with his divine eye, came to Dhritarashtra. You should know this. Your wicked fool of a son is making plans to go and kill your nephews in the forest. There is no way that he can be successful. He'll die himself. You must put a stop to it. Perhaps if he spent time with the Pandavas without his henchmen, he might grow to love them. But no, a tiger doesn't change its stripes. What do you think of all this, Dhritarashtra? What do the elders think? I think it's fate, said the unhappy king. I knew the dice game was ill-judged. The elders thought the same. But I love my son. I can't stand against him, and I cannot bear to see him suffer. I understand, said Vyasa. It is well known that nothing is more important than one's son. Krishna visited the exiles' camp, bringing with him several powerful allies. All were filled with rage at what had happened. Never had the brothers witnessed Krishna so angry, fire blazing in his black eyes. Duryodhana, Shakuni and their cronies are villains. Here are you and Draupadi condemned to vegetate year after year in rustic poverty, dull, isolated, deprived of every comfort you have fought for and deserve. Be assured, the thirsty earth will drink their blood. They will not prevail. The lovely Draupadi addressed Krishna, tears streaming down like rain onto her breasts. Krishna, you are the supreme person, Lord of the world. You know everything that is and all that is to come. Tell me, how could I, the most devoted wife, mother, sister, be dragged from my seclusion by the hair in front of that assembly, wearing only one blood-stained garment and treated like a slave? The vile Dukshasana insulted me as no woman should be insulted, still less one born, as I was, to a royal line. Had I no husbands? Even a feeble husband protects his wife. That is the way of Dharma. And yet the Dharma king and his valiant brothers sat watching this, motionless and silent like effigies, while the mother of their sons was vilely savaged. Even the worthy elders sat silent, shuffling in their splendid seats. I despise these men. I have contempt for skill, heroic strength, for marvellous weapons, that yet allow evil Duryodhana to live and breathe unpunished, unrepentant. I won't forgive it. I was not born for this. I have no husbands if my humiliation goes unravaged. Krishna said to her, blameless Draupadi, I make this promise, you will be queen again. And you will witness the Kauravas' wives shrieking with grief to see their husbands' corpses sprawled on the battlefield, cloaked in blood, slain by the Pandavas. Soon the time came for sad leave-taking. Krishna departed, taking Abhimanyu and Draupadi's brother, took her other children back with him to his city of Panchala. Yudhishthira proposed a change of scene. Arjuna suggested the lake, known as a holy and auspicious site. The lake was indeed delightful, bordered with bright flowers and graceful trees, pendulous with many types of mango and other fruits. Birds sang among the leaves of the tall palm, arak and shala trees. Flocks of doves, linnets and forest cuckoos, deer and game were plentiful. A sage, passing on his way to the Himalaya, smiled to see Yudhishthira and his brothers living as forest dwellers. He knew inaction could be hard to bear and counselled patience. Wait, Yudhishthira, do not be tempted to depart from dharma and wage war on the Kauravas too soon. Keep your promise, tolerate your exile, and you will retrieve your fortune in the end. Yudhishthira fasted for 2 days and nights, never sleeping, mastering his breath, and on the 3rd day walked into the river, the mighty Ganga, as it was getting light, and raised his face towards the rising sun. He stood waist deep with the silky water flowing all around him. O Lord Surya, enemy of darkness, origin of all things, you who are the eye of the universe, giver of strength to every living thing, you who are fire, you who are subtle mind, you who are the unlocked door, the comfort of those who thirst for freedom, source of all light, source of all comforting warmth, giver of beauty beyond all imagining. O Lord, hear my prayer. Enable me to feed my precious brothers, my wife, my friends, who are suffering in this wilderness
Suffering
on my account.